Hey, folks, welcome to another episode of Cutter One. I am your host, Jay, just Jay, your resident troublemaker and your resident culture warrior. All right, I hope you are all doing well. Let's get right into it. We got another article coming to us from the folks over at Screen Rant, and this is what Lord of the Rings new movies mean for Amazon's The Rings of Poo Poo. New Lord of the Rings movies are officially in development, and here is what that means for the future of Amazon's The Rings of Poo Poo TV show. This is coming to us from Cooper Hood. Warner Brothers is making new Lord of the Rings movies, and that raises plenty of questions about the future of Amazon's hit series, The Lord of the Rings of Poo Poo. The fantasy world J.R.R. Tolkien created came back in a major way in 2022 thanks to the release of Prime Video's live-action series. The Rings of Poo Poo took viewers thousands of years into the past of Middle-earth, setting itself well before the events of Peter Jackson's The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings movies. Despite some controversial moments, Amazon's The Rings of Poo Poo series effectively ushered in a new era for the Lord of the Rings franchise. The state of the overall franchise has changed now thanks to recent developments on the future of the films. Nearly a decade after the final Hobbit movie, Warner Brothers is finally developing new Lord of the Rings movies that will be made for live action. There are no specific details yet about which characters or stories the films will focus on, but the presence of more adventures set in Middle-earth comes as Amazon still has massive plans for the Rings of Poo Poo. Understandably, it creates questions about how the two Lord of the Rings properties are connected and what the new movies mean for Amazon's show. Are WB's new Lord of the Rings movies connected to the Rings of Poo Poo? Simply put, Warner Brothers' new Lord of the Rings movies are not connected to the Rings of Poo Poo in any way. The announcement of the new films comes as WB's New Line Entertainment agreed to a deal to work with Middle-earth Enterprises. It is important to note that Middle-earth Enterprises holds the movie rights to the Lord of the Rings franchise, which is why New Line acquired the company to extend its use of the popular franchise beyond the upcoming anime movie, The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim. While the new Lord of the Rings movies run through WB, New Line, and Middle-earth Enterprises, The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Crap is moving forward as planned under completely different studios. Amazon is working directly with the Tolkien Estate to bring its live-action series to Prime Video. The Tolkien Estate and Middle-earth Enterprises are not connected as J.R.R. Tolkien sold the movie rights in 1969. Amazon's show is instead based loosely on the appendices of the Return of the King book. Due to the way the rights currently stand, the Rings of Poo Poo and the new Lord of the Rings movies will remain separate entities. Can new Lord of the Rings movies cover stories from the Rings of Poo Poo? The rights to J.R.R. Tolkien's literary works and Middle-earth's various ages does mean that there could be some overlap in terms of the Lord of the Rings movies covering the same stories as the Rings of Crap. It has been stated that the new films are drawing from the original Lord of the Rings books and the Hobbit novel. That could include the same appendices that the Rings of Poo Poo is based on. Judging by the development of the Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim, as a result, some crossover between the stories that the new movies and Amazon show can happen. WB's new Lord of the Rings movies will not directly redo stories that the Rings of Poo Poo is covering in great detail, but it could be a case where the film will reference events that the show is exploring. Peter Jackson's original Lord of the Rings films had flashbacks to Sauron forging the One Ring and Isildur cutting it off in battle, which is the exact story that the Rings of Poo Poo is telling and building towards. That is why the original movies and the show have both used Galadriel, Elrond, Sauron, Isildur, and possibly Gandalf. WB's new Lord of the Rings movies could include similarly well-known characters too. Will the new Lord of the Rings movies affect the Rings of Poo Poo? Whatever similarities might exist between the two properties, the new Lord of the Rings movies could not should not affect the Rings of Poo Poo in any significant way. Amazon is fully committed to a 5-season run for the live action series, with season 2 already in production. The Rings of Poo Poo's success means the company will not stray from these plans to make the series one of the biggest shows on TV, even if new movies are going to be made. If anything, it could possibly give Amazon a greater incentive to let the Rings of Poo Poo be as bold and epic as possible to make sure it can compete with the films. It should also help the Rings of Poo Poo that the first of these new Lord of the Rings movies are likely still many years away from being released. That means the Lord of the Rings of Poo Poo, will remain the only source for live action Middle Earth content for the foreseeable future, unless, you watch The Hobbit or the Lord of the Rings trilogy, extended editions. The only other effect the new Lord of the Rings movies could have is unofficial coordination by the studios to make sure the films are not released at the same time a new season is airing, creating unnecessary competition for the Tolkien properties. All right, here's my thoughts on that one. Okay, this is another copium article like the previous one, from Bradley Prom, although this is Cooper Hood. The Screen Rant folks have amazing names, by the way. Um, Having said that, yeah, they're wrong on several counts, in my opinion. I think simply the announcement of the Warner Brothers New Line Cinema / Peter Jackson, Walsh and Boyan's announcements, has scared the ever living piss out of Amazon, because they understand what this is, right? So here's the hypothetical that I would envision. Okay, whereas the Rings of Crap has tried to tell the entire Second Age over 5 seasons, right? And that's caused them to make a lot of bad decisions, right? Really bad decisions, right? The films aren't going to have that same problem. So what's going to happen is you will, because the films are, as implied in the announcement that was put out by Warner Brothers, the films are still going to be locked into using the Lord of the Rings trilogy of books as well as the Hobbit books, which means, like the article correctly states, that they're probably going to be pulling from the appendices as well, right, to tell new stories, right? I can't see them veering off, like New Line and Peter Jackson. I can't see them veering off and giving us an Aragorn origin story or a Gandalf origin story, like some people are speculating. I don't see that happening. I think the New Line and Warner Brothers studio executives, they see how things are going with Marvel and the Marvel universe, and how that's sort of derailed recently, and they're not going to do that, and with like inundating us with the origins of Gollum, the origins of Gandalf, Faramir, a love story. They're not going to do that, right? What they're going to do is they're going to give us a story about an event, right? I personally think they're going to give us either a trilogy of films that lead up to the fall of Numenor, or they'll give us a trilogy of films that will lead up to the War of the Last Alliance. And I think that I'm inclined to lean more towards the War of the Last Alliance, although I would love to see the fall of Numenor. But I think we're going to get a trilogy based on the War of the Last Alliance. Now, what does this mean for Amazon? Obviously, it's basically New Line and Warner Brothers taking a dump in Amazon's cereal, for lack of a better analogy, and they know it. And I don't think that there will be interstudio coordination going on here. I think what's going to happen is you're going to see New Line and Warner Brothers just be like, "Hey, you guys screwed the pooch. You had your shot. You blew it. Now move over. Let the big kids play." That's what I think is going to happen. Now, could this announcement mean that Amazon sort of takes Pain and Decay off the leash a little bit? I'm sure it will. It will, but you're not going to see that till season 3, 4, and 5. But with Pain and Decay, I don't think it's going to help. I think that if anything, it's going to hinder, right? Amazon's sort of locked itself into certain things that are hindering this show, whether people want to admit it or not. And, you know, them trying, even if they sort of unchain and cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war, as it were, with Pain and Decay, and sort of let them have free reign, they're still beholden to other outside factors that are going to impact their show. And Pain and Decay, no matter how much freedom they have, will be corralled within these factors, like Amazon's quote unquote diversity requirements. Okay, and I'm not saying this to sort of bring that whole subject, in and get deep into it, but the reality is Amazon has a thing that all of their shows have to have a certain amount of in front of the camera as well as behind the camera diversity and equity hires, right? Which means that, the guy who may have the better idea for how to shoot a scene or light a scene or some dialogue in the script, well, they may not necessarily have that input that would have helped the show, because Amazon is saying, like, look, we need X amount of women. So even though, yes, you may have a track record of writing really good stuff, you're not a woman, and we have some spots reserved for women that we need to fill. And on the face of it, it is what it is, right? Like, you can make of that what you will, but I think that ultimately that hinders a show because you don't have that unfettered creativity, right? And I think that's what New Line and Warner Brothers is, especially Warner Brothers, because, with David Zaslav and stuff like that, he's trying to pull Warner Brothers from the edge of oblivion, because they were so invested in a lot of those types of policies that it was sort of dictating the content, right? There comes a tipping point where your adherence to the policies that may be great for public relations, right? But your adherence to those policies is now starting to affect your creative abilities, right? Because you're having to supplement those creative tendencies in order to make sure that you adhere to those ideological or political ones, right? And so Warner Brothers, David Zaslav, he's cleaning up a mess. He's trying to pull Warner Brothers back from a precipice where they were losing hundreds of millions or billions of dollars because they were so focused on adhering to the policies that they were losing sight of the creativity. And so he's trying to reverse that trend. So I think that would come through in any New Line, Warner Brothers, Lord of the Rings content that they put out over the next couple of years, in that they're going to be focused on putting out the best content that they can and worrying less about adhering to a policy. Whereas Amazon is in the exact opposite camp. Amazon is all about, we have to adhere to the policy, and that is sort of guiding the creative process, right? And we see that. We see how it manifests itself in the shows, and sort of some of the downsides to that, right? Take Arondir and Disa, and to a lesser extent Sardoc, the Harfoot, right? Lenny James character. Excuse me. Because you need to have certain representation, the policy, you have to adhere to the policy of having certain representation, right? You don't creatively try to incorporate that into the world. And that's why you have some tokenized characters like Arondir and Disa and stuff like that, where there's no backstory there. There's no grounding in the world there, right? And I had somebody ask me in a comment section from a video a while back, they were like, why does it matter that whether or not Arondir has a backstory? Is it because it ties him to the world? Because it ties him to the world. If you have a single black elf character, right, by himself, and there is no other black elf characters at all throughout all 8 episodes of that show, okay, the question becomes, Why is he different? Why is he the only one like that? And if there is no logical answer presented within the show, then it just reeks of being a tokenized adherence to a policy of the production company, as opposed to being something that's integrated into the story. Right. And so you break that suspension of disbelief, because when I look at that character, there's no logical consistency there. Okay. There's no, are there other elves in the South that he's a part of that are, darker, have darker complexions? Was he from a group of elves that were wiped out, during the last war with Morgoth? Like, something to ground it in the world, okay? And that gets left out because the focus is adhere to the policy, not focus on the creativity, right? And so you see it manifest in a lot of those different ways. And I think Warner Brothers doesn't have to worry about that, whereas Amazon is like deeply now invested in that. And that just means that the movies are going to really, really cause Amazon some headaches, I think. And I think that's what they're going to do. And so, ultimately, I don't think, no matter how they're going to try and spin it, and like I said, this is article number 2 that's trying to say, oh, well, it's not such a big deal. No matter how they try and spin it, I think this is probably the worst news that, oh, sorry, I hit my hand. The worst news that Amazon could have got, right, was this news that New Line and Peter Jackson and Walsh and Boyens and the WB, excuse me, are getting back into the Lord of the Rings games. And I do hope that we get to see a trilogy of films that culminates in the War of the Last Alliance, and or a trilogy of films that shows us the real story of Anatar, Lord of Gifts, and how, the Numenorians fall from grace, as it were, and ultimately the fall of Numenor, right? I think those would be great films. I think it would be a great trilogy to see. I do think that because of Amazon taking so long in between seasons, right? At earliest, we're looking at Rings of Crap season 2 coming out mid, 2024, right? So we're over a year away from it, right? I think that gives the New Line and WB and Co. Plenty of time to sit down and even if it takes them 3 or 4 years to get the production up and running on a new film for this, which would be an exceedingly long time. Usually these things can, on average, I would say 2 to 3 years, from initial conversations to when you have like a shooting script and a draft of the script, and you're starting to like bring in crews and put together a crew and stuff like that. 2 to 3 years. So I mean, we may see the first of these New Line films being announced around the time of season 3 for the Prime show, and it'll be interesting to see. I think Amazon right now is quaking in their boots because they realize they're not the only game in town. And the other team is the quote-unquote fan favorite. But, we'll have to see. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments section below as we get into the phase where you start to see all these articles and whatnot saying how, running interference for the Amazon show. It'll be interesting as things move forward. Yeah, so that's all I got for right now. I just wanted to share that one with you guys. So remember, if you like the video. If you want to hear me cough. Sorry about that. If you want to share the video, by all means do so. It helps us with the YouTube algorithm. It helps us get seen. It helps more people check out the video and maybe want to decide to subscribe, and that would be awesome. And if you have not subscribed, I hope that with this episode you would consider giving your subscription to the channel. We're shooting to get to 1,000 by June 1st, right? I know to a lot of people that would seem like nothing, small potatoes and stuff like that, but it's kind of a niche show, niche channel here. So yeah, I would be happy if we could hit 1,000 by June 1st. But yeah, and if you are a returning subscriber, thank you from the bottom of my heart. You truly are an army of beautiful badasses. So that's going to do it for right now. Let me know what you think. Do you think Amazon's quaking in their boots with the announcement from New Line? Um, and how do you think it would play? And what would you like to see in the films? What do you think they should cover? In the films, right? Do you think they should do like the origin story route? I'm not feeling that. Or do you think maybe the fall of Numenor, maybe the War of the Last Alliance, or something like that? Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. All right, that's it for right now. Remember to be good, be awesome, be safe, but more importantly, stay more dorkish. Peace.